How many people do we have
Hey,
on?
good evening, everybody. Welcome to our main event this evening. We have got Andrew and Jim with us, who are co-authors of the JFK assassination chokeholds that prove there was a conspiracy. And oh boy, do we love conspiracies on this channel. The guests are at the side, but I'm just going to read the blurb from this book so you guys know what we're getting into this evening. So, in JFK assassination chokeholds, readers will find up-to-date evidence that would have compelled any jury to conclude that Oswald was not guilty beyond reasonable doubt, and that there is clear and convincing evidence of both a conspiracy and obstruction of justice to cover it up. The approach taken by the contributors in this anthology, two of whom are with us this evening, three of whom are attorneys, complemented by two of the leading authorities in the field, focus on 60 years of revelations that have been inescapably proven. There is no way around these matters, making them argumentative chokeholds. The next time a historian, teacher, author, or Warren Commission backer comedian, Warren Commission comedian, we should say, pushes the lone nut assassin scenario, the reader will be able to counter with troubling questions such as: why was Oswald impersonated? Why did Ruby receive assistance in murdering Oswald? Why do an overwhelming number of investigation insiders not believe the Warren Commission conclusions? How can one explain the scandalous shenanigans around JFK's brain and the chain of custody for CE399 and many other inexplicable facts that are a matter of record? On November 22nd, 63, the world took a turn for the worse. JFK and everything he stood for was cruelly taken away from us. Hopefully, the truth can help pave the way for a new direction. So we've got two of the co-authors with us this evening. This book has got 4.5 stars on Amazon USA, 176 ratings. Well worth a read, guys. And the link for the book is in the description box if you're watching this on YouTube. And I will also put the link in the live chat right now. So before we get into all this stuff, I would like our guests to introduce themselves and let the viewers know what qualifies them to speak on these subjects. So we'll go with Andrew first, please.
Oh, hey, Sean. Thank you very much. I'm Andrew Iler. I'm a Canadian lawyer, and I've been working on the legal aspects of the JFK case for the last 5 or 6 years, studying in particular the JFK Records Act, which led me to being part of at least the early stages of a lawsuit that I helped draft and research against President Biden for the release of the records after President Biden postponed the release of tens of thousands of records. So I put in a substantial amount of work on that effort. I'm not part of that group anymore, but that work led me into writing the book with Jim, Matt Crumpton, Mark Adamczyk, and Paul Blow, the other authors of JFK assassination chokeholds.
Yeah, of course, Biden didn't bloody release anything. All right, Jim, do you want to address the viewers?
Okay.
Thanks for coming on.
I've been a writer and researcher on this case for approximately the last 31 or 32 years in many functions. I was the editor and publisher of something called Probe Magazine. Today, that's transferred to the internet. It's called kennedysandking.com. I've been either the co-editor or their sole writer of 5 books on this case. And I was the screenwriter for Oliver Stone's documentaries, JFK Revisited and JFK Destiny Betrayed. The second one is a 4-hour version. The first one is a 2-hour version. And those films have been shown and sold in 15 different countries. All right, so far. Okay. All right. So that's roughly my background on this.
Wow. So this is you guys' life's work then. So, Andrew, we'll start with you then. And viewers, please get your questions in. I know some have already come in and I'm gathering them as we speak. But yeah, please put your questions in while we've got this opportunity while we're live with Andrew and Jim. So, Andrew, then, we recently had this news from Trump. What did you make of that about the release? I know there's not a date set, is there? There's like a something's got to be decided about the date. Is that correct?
Yeah, early last week, President Trump, well, I think it was actually on the 21st or 22nd, President Trump issued an executive order with respect to the JFK Records Act. And that order, I mean, the news has reported it that President Trump has released all the files. That actually hasn't happened. What has happened is that he's ordered the Director of National Intelligence and the Department of Justice to come up with a plan to release all the files. So I don't think any file has been released since the executive order, but there's probably, another 10 days in which a new plan has to be issued by the DNI and the Department of Justice to lay out who knows how long it's going to take. It's already taken 60 plus years. So everyone is waiting to see what this plan is and how long and how effective it's going to be before the rest of the files are going to release. I have to be honest, we've heard this before, that all the files would be released in 2017. And really, this is what gets Americans especially so upset. This case is about one thing. Congress passed a law in 1992, and it mandated all of the records be released in October 2017. And this story is now turned into one of the government repeatedly violating its own laws. So I think this is what is getting people a little bit frustrated with what's happened. And hopefully President Trump is going to come through on his promise and actually release all of the files.
Yeah, it seems after these attempts on his life, he's being incentivized to shine a light on the deep state. And Jim, when you heard this news about the executive order, what was your gut reaction to it?
Well, let me say what's good about it, and then let me qualify that. First of all, this is really good in that it at least partly eradicates what Joe Biden had done, which Andrew wrote a very good article about at kennedysandking.com, which essentially, something, I think I have to get some background so your listeners really understand what we're talking about. The reason there ever was a JFK Records Collection Act was because of Oliver Stone's 1991 movie, JFK, which I'm sure most of your listeners have either seen or heard. All right. At the end of that movie, Oliver put a caption on the screen that said, "The files of the last investigation of the Kennedy case, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, are closed until the year 2029. Now, remember, this is 1991. So when people left the theater, they're going, why do we have to wait 38 years to see the last secrets of the John F. Kennedy assassination? That doesn't make any sense if the Warren Commission was correct. All right. And so they literally besieged Washington. They sent in telegrams. They made phone calls. They sent faxes. They called their congressman. And they basically said, what in God's name is so secret about the Kennedy assassination that we have to wait? And then most of us will be dead, by the time those files are released anyway, And so this forced Congress to do something. And this was the JFK Records Collection Act of 1992. Now, George H.W. Bush dilly-dallied around this thing, okay, for a year or two. All right. And then finally, when Clinton became president, he selected a 5-person board. Now, let me explain why this review board was so revolutionary. And that's not an exaggeration at all. It was a revolutionary agency. Up until that time, if you wanted the secrets of any kind of federal agency or crime, you would have to go through something called the Freedom of Information Act. See, the problem with the Freedom of Information Act was, number one, the plaintiff never actually saw the document. Okay. All right. So you were working relatively blind. And secondly, the plaintiff had the burden of proof. You had to show why this thing should be declassified against the grounds, and they always do this vague, like rubric called national security. Okay, national security. All right. So the secrets of why Kennedy are dead are a matter of national security. Okay, so it was very difficult unless you had a great lawyer. Okay, to try and see with the review board, this was changed. They saw the document. They actually had the document. And so the burden of proof was now on the CIA or the FBI. You have to prove to us why we should not declassify this document. And these guys really didn't like this. The FBI at the first meeting when they came in, the FBI liaison came in with his attorney, and the board put the document on the screen. And the chairman of the board, John Thunheim, said, he turned to the FBI guy, now, what on earth is so important about not declassifying that document? You're going to have to prove it to us. And the FBI guy turns to his lawyer with a shocked look on his face, and he says, they can really do that? and the lawyer said, yeah, they can. Okay. and so that's what this was like. Okay. It was a revolutionary agency, and they declassified something like 2 million pages of documents, but they ran out of time and they ran out of money. And so they didn't finish the job. All right. But that is, although I say that, and although the MSN echoes that they didn't finish the job, as Andrew will tell you later, that isn't really true. Okay. And there's a very interesting story behind that, which he uncovered. All right. And so this is why this was now left to first Trump. Okay. Because Trump was up during the so-called termination date. In the JFK Record Collection Act law, it says every single document must be declassified by October 2017. And Trump even tweeted about this a week and a half before the termination date, which I think was October the 26th. Okay. He said, I'm really looking forward to declassifying the last of the JFK documents. And this is on the news. That tweet gets on CBS. Okay. So everybody's looking forward, to seeing the last of the JFK documents. And then what happens? On the day this was supposed to happen, the CIA and the FBI go into the Oval Office and they read Trump the Riot Act. Now, what is the Riot Act? The Riot Act goes something like this. If you declassify these documents, there's an agent we have in Mexico City, and his life will be in danger. And if he gets harmed or killed, it's blood on your hands, and we are going to tell the world what you did. And so, quite naturally, Trump got intimidated. From what I understand, the guy who did most of the carrying of that water was Mike Pompeo, okay, who I think was a director of the CIA at that time. All right. And so Trump then does a delay. He delays it for 6 months. Then, incredibly, at the end of those 6 months, he did another extension, this time for 3 years. The problem with that, of course, is that he wasn't even president at the end of the 3 years. It was Joe Biden who's now became president. And as Andrew so beautifully elucidated in his article for Kennedy's and King, what Biden did was even worse, because what Biden did, and I may be exaggerating only a little bit, he denuded the ARB Act and essentially reverted us back more or less to the Freedom of Information Act. Okay? All these people would now be sitting at a table. Whoever was arguing for, disclosure, whoever was arguing against it, and they would be able to make these statements instead of having the presumption, which was in the law, that everything should be out there. All right. So then what happens then is during the campaign, Joe Rogan and Andrew Napolitano started going after Trump because they told him, you broke your promise to the American people. And Trump says, what are you talking about, Andrew? He says, you told the American people that you were going to declassify every last one of the JFK secret documents, and you didn't. All right. And so Trump says, Judge, listen, if they would have shown you what they had shown me, you would have done the same thing. And Napolitano says, who is they and what did they show you? Okay. And Trump begged off and he said, sometime when there's not 15 people listening to the conversation, I'll let you know. Okay. But then during the campaign itself, when he went on Joe Rogan, he asked him about it. All right. And Trump kind of repented, saying that I probably shouldn't have done that. Okay. And, this time around, I won't. All right. But then the clincher was Bobby Kennedy Jr., okay, picking him as his HHS director, and Bobby Kennedy Jr., of course, because of the situation he's in and who his father and uncle were, really was pushing the issue a lot. So that is why we're at where we're at. That's the long story about how on earth we got here. Okay.
Thank you. That's fascinating. And we've got over 1,000 people watching live now. If you've just tuned in, we've got two of the authors of the JFK assassination chokeholds that prove there was a conspiracy. Link in the description box for the book. And viewers, can you put a 1 in the chat if you believe there was a conspiracy to assassinate JFK? Can you put a 2 in the chat if you think there was not a conspiracy, that the lone gunman mainstream media narrative stands? I see we've got a lot of 1s coming in. So Andrew, we've already got almost 20 questions coming from the viewers, and I will give you the one about, where is it? Here we go, from Nisi. Is the death of JFK and JFK Jr. connected? Are they connected as in political corruption?
You know something? That's a really interesting question, because if you would have asked me that question like 6 months ago, I would have said, no, that's off the wall, bonkers, crazy. But it turns out I did some reading on this. All right. And this is something I didn't know at all. And the MSN has completely covered it up. JFK Jr. had a girlfriend, okay, who he was very close to. She's very hard to communicate with. You can't get her on the phone. All right. She'll only communicate with letters. Her name is Maggie. And she revealed that JFK Jr.'s burning political ambition in life was to eventually find the killers of his father and bring them to justice. All right. He had read and this is something else I didn't know. he had read almost every book there was on the JFK assassination. And what makes this even worse is that he was planning to run for governor of New York. Okay. And that was going to be a springboard. Now I don't have to finish the story because everybody can put that together, so this is this is something that like a few months ago I would have said is no, of course. But now I have to qualify this because those are pretty much verifiable facts. All right. So yeah, actually the question is a qualified yes. Yeah.
All right, Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, you know what, Jim's the expert on most of the facts and the evidence. I largely have stuck to the legal end of things on this case, but I do want to make a point, Sean. You repeat the title of our book, and it says that proves there was a conspiracy. Now, really, the word conspiracy and the whole term conspiracy theorist have been used so negatively against anyone who's had any interest in the Kennedy assassination. Chapter 1 of Chokeholds is like a uniquely incredible chapter of the book. It actually shows that the people who believe the Warren Commission and the single lone nut assassin Oswald, they're in the substantial minority of people. I think it's over 74% of Americans believe that there was a conspiracy to assassinate the president in 1963. And chapter 1 goes over 70 individuals who were actually investigation insiders. So members of the Warren Commission who all wrote their name underneath the Lone Nut conspiracy report in 1964. A large number of them didn't believe their own Lone Nut conclusion. Members of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the last official government investigation, actually concluded there was a high probability of a conspiracy. Members of the Dallas Police Department, a large number of them, including the chief of police, believed that there was a conspiracy and a shooter on the proverbial grassy knoll. J. Edgar Hoover, multiple presidents of the United States are all recorded saying that they didn't believe the lone nut assassin story of the Warren Commission. So, you know, you have a number of high-profile conspiracy deniers who the mainstream media seem to put on a regular basis on the news. That's all you see under the mainstream media is lone nut proponents. But really, chapter 1 of Chokeholds is incredible. And Paul Blow, the author of chapter 1, he's come up with another 20 on the record insiders who've denied their own lone nut story. So I think it's important that your listeners and viewers understand that if you think there was a conspiracy, you're in the large majority of people, no matter what the news says.
To be precise, 4 out of the 7 Warren commissioners ended up believing it was a conspiracy. So you had the majority of them thinking it was, saying something different, but believing something else. All right.
All right. So here's a question from Tracy, Jim. Is it true that JFK was actually shot in the back of his head, killed by a bodyguard who was in the back of his car? Not sure what your thoughts are.
No, that isn't true. Now, this whole issue about the wound in the back of Kennedy's head is a very controversial issue. Okay, now what exactly do I mean by that? See, when bullets enter the body, they have an entrance and an exit. All right. Most of the time, the entrance is going to be a rather small, clean-edged wound. And then as the bullet progresses through the body, it picks up blood and tissue, etc. So that when it exits, it has a larger what they call a vulsive kind of a wound that has rough edges. See, in this particular case, 42 witnesses at both Parkland Hospital, which is the first hospital Kennedy was taken to, the emergency room, and at Bethesda Morgue, which is the place where the autopsy was held that night. 42 witnesses saw this avulsive wound in the right rear of Kennedy's skull. Now, I don't have to tell your listeners that mini lecture I just gave them, that's strongly indicative of a wound from the front. And then if you match that up, I don't know if you have the Zapruder film. If you match that up with the Zapruder film, okay, that's pretty convincing evidence that Kennedy was hit by a shot from the front. Those two pieces of evidence are pretty compelling, I think.
Sean, can I jump in on that? You know, 3 of our chapters really in Chokeholds cover this in amazing detail. And I think Jim wrote one chapter called The Evidentiary Mess of the 20th Century, which really covers how the autopsy was a complete botch job. And I mean, this is an autopsy of the President of the United States. But really, in my mind, one of the most important pieces of controversy is over the last 60 years is how there's been such a divergence between what the Warren Commission says was the actual truth about the president's head wound. All of the Parkland medical staff testified, and a number under oath on several occasions, that there was this large back head wound on the president's head, including 2 of the top neurosurgeons at the main trauma hospital in Dallas, Texas. Okay, they're all testifying that there was cerebellum coming out of the lower part of the back right of the president's head. Cerebellum's part of the lower back part of the brain. It can only come out of a hole in the very lowest part of the back of the head. Now, all of a sudden, there's a divergence once the president gets to the military autopsy at Bethesda, Maryland, and what we're told for 60 years is that there was no head wound on the president. There was no gaping hole on the back of the head. And the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the 70s all said there was no gaping hole in the back of the head. The Parkland doctors were wrong, and the Bethesda autopsy guys were the experts, and they were right. But Sean, in the 1990s, the truth came out through the Assassination Records Review Board. And what the ARRB found is that a lot of the Bethesda witness statements and evidence actually confirmed what the Dallas doctors said. And that was suppressed from the public by the Warren Commission and, really sadly, by the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And Jim, maybe you can correct me if I've gone wrong anywhere there, but I don't think I have.
The House Select Committee on Assassinations actually lied about this. Okay, in volume 7, page 37 of their series, they actually say that in opposition to the witnesses at Parkland Hospital, all the witnesses at Bethesda somehow missed this baseball-sized wound, that the people at Parkland saw. They actually wrote that. And you can look it up if you don't believe me. Volume 7, page 37. Well, the only reason they could say that is because they classified all the reports that impeach that sentence. Okay, this is not true at all.
This is really mind-blowing, Sean. I mean, this is perhaps the biggest obstruction of true justice in the entire Kennedy case. The Warren Commission essentially diminished and disregarded dozens of witnesses from Parkland Hospital that testified to seeing this back of the head wound. And in reality, there was a back of the head wound, And that was confirmed by another dozen witnesses at the autopsy. And that truth was completely suppressed. This is something that, again, the mainstream media has failed to cover. And, for your British listeners, I don't know, maybe I'm getting this story, and Sean, you probably know the story better than I do. King Richard III, you're familiar with how his body was unceremoniously dumped behind a cathedral, and it was only found, I think, in the 2000s. This guy, King Richard III, died at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. His body was thrown in an open grave, naked in an open grave, and covered, unmarked grave. They found it in the 2000s, and they determined his cause of death precisely. And
Wow.
there's really, we're here in 2025, and we're still wondering what President Kennedy's cause of death was. I mean, to me, this can be solved very, very quickly. Let's do a real forensic examination of the president's head wounds. It would be resolved immediately.
Wow. So several people have asked Jim whether the Zapruder film was doctored, altered, massaged by the CIA, FBI, perhaps.
All right, on that particular issue, I'm an agnostic. Okay, I'm not going to say yes, and I'm not going to say no. I've seen arguments on both of these, on both sides. There is a rather compelling argument about their. See, if you watch a Zapruder film, all right, the back of Kennedy's head, all right, there's seems to be a kind of dark spot over the back of Kennedy's head that has what advocates on that side say are straight edges, which unlikely to be shadows from trees or anything like that. If that is true, and I'm not saying it is, okay, if that is true, then one logical supposition is that the reason it's there is to cover up this opening in the back of Kennedy's skull. Okay. All right. Now, there's other more complicated arguments about whether or not the CIA had the film. Most people will believe that is actually true. And if they did make any alterations to the film, for instance, let me give you another example that they use. Everyone who's watched a Zapruder film sees this spray that comes out the top of Kennedy's skull, okay? And you see this kind of white patch or blob or whatever, okay? Some people believe, because that spray is only visible for the most infinitesimal period of time, okay? And some people believe that the white patch, okay, which I believe is actually on this side, okay, was painted over. Now, let me make one last argument about this, because it's a very complex argument we could spend an hour on at least. See, the late Don Thomas, who was a very good researcher, once found a blow-up picture of Kennedy's head in the morgue. Okay, it's a crop picture. And he put it on display at a seminar, and he blew it up. And he said, "What is that?" And he pointed to this, what looked like a small wound in the hairline of JFK. Okay. And he just kind of left it at that. Okay. The obvious supposition being this was part of an entrance wound that perhaps the blob and the spray was meant to distract from. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. Can we get over 500 likes, please? Okay, I hope we can. Okay.
Hey, let me ask Jim a question, if I can, Sean, to follow up. Hey, Jim,
Yes, please.
were any frames from the Zapruder film removed or cut out? Do we know that?
Yes, there were frames excised, and even the government admits this. Okay, and they call it a printing error. Okay, J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, called it a quote printing error. When these frames were recovered, okay, and placed back into the film, what's so interesting about this is that they revealed something that the Warren Commission did not want to acknowledge. They revealed that Kennedy was struck before he went behind the sign. Okay. And the Warren Commission had always said no, because there was a tree there. And so therefore Oswald could not have hit him. Well, the obvious deduction then is that, well, maybe somebody besides Oswald was firing, okay? And that's how he got hit before he went behind the sign. Okay, so that's a very interesting very interesting reveal, as they say.
Well, we've got a question from Wenchy, and that is, and this is the $1 million question: why was JFK killed, and why did they say the person who did it was a lone wolf?
All right. Well, your listeners like these complex questions, I guess. Okay, why was Kennedy killed? There's been all kinds of reasons sallied forth on this issue from about 1964 onward. After studying this case for a very long, over 3 decades, I'm in the school that Kennedy was killed because he had a foreign policy that was relatively reformist, relatively radical compared to what had come before him. All right. And that he was trying to implement these changes, especially in the third world. Now, why is that so objectionable? Because a lot of what we call the power elite in the United States and also Great Britain, okay, which are at that time were kind of, cousins, all right, they had a lot of interest, imperial interests in the third world, where they made a lot of money off of these colonized people. All right. For instance, in the Congo, okay, which is a very rich country. All right. Very, very high mineral wealth. Kennedy was backing a democratic reformer called Patrice Lumumba. All right. And Lumumba wanted the Congo, for the Congolese people. He felt that the resources of the Congo should not be brought back to Europe for the enrichment of the stockholders in Belgium or England or the United States, but they should go to benefit this impoverished country. Well, a lot of people didn't like that, and Eisenhower commissioned Ellen Dulles to assassinate Patrice Lumumba. And they actually did try about 3 times, okay? But they failed. But they knew they had to get rid of him before Kennedy became president, because they knew Kennedy was going to back Lumumba, okay? So they altered the plan. The CIA altered their plan, and they got Lumumba into the hands of his enemies, of this renegade state called Katanga, which Belgium and England were backing, because that was where all the riches were. And they set him up in front of a firing squad and killed him. And the problem was that his followers found where he was buried, and they didn't want him to become a martyr. So they dug up his body, and then they burned it in sulfuric acid, so there would be nothing left of his remains. This was what Kennedy was up against. Okay, and that's just one example. All right, I can name others. Like what he was doing in Vietnam, what he was doing in Indonesia, what he was doing in the Middle East, etc. Okay, which was essentially upsetting the apple cart, for these very wealthy investors, who wanted, the riches of Indonesia, for example, were even larger than what was in Congo. There was actually 2 mountains that had the heaviest deposits of gold in the world at that time. Okay. And the private company Freeport Sulphur wanted those. Okay. All right. And they had to get, I'll make this short and sweet. To accomplish this, taking over the gold mountain, they had to do 3 things, which they did. They had to get rid of Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN Secretary General. They had to get rid of Kennedy, the President of the United States, and they had to overthrow Sukarno, the guy that Hammarskjöld and Kennedy were backing in Indonesia. And all three were accomplished. Okay. And that's how Freeport Sulphur became Freeport McMoran, a company worth $20 billion eventually. All right. So those are the kind of things that Kennedy was up against. And I don't have to tell your listeners, if there's that kind of money on the table, okay, people will kill for that kind of money. And they have. All right.
So do you see parallels with Trump then? For example, the wealth of Ukraine, the exploitation of Ukraine, he's trying to shut that down. Do you think that Trump's on a similar trajectory as JFK?
Well, now you really opened up a Pandora's box. Okay. See, to explain where Kennedy's coming from, and again, I'm going to try and make this, what do they call those? The Cliff Notes version. This is the Cliff Notes version of where Kennedy was coming from. See, Kennedy really was a Truman Democrat when he came in. He was a kind of middle of the pack kind of guy. What radicalized Kennedy is that when he went to Saigon in 1951 to survey what was going on there with the French Civil War going on at that time, and when he visited there, the French were telling him, "Oh, don't worry about this. We're going to put down the Viet Minh. Okay, we're going to stay in control, etc." Then he talked to a couple of people, one named Edmund Gillian, who he knew from the State Department. Okay. And one was Seymour Topping from the New York Times. And they both told him when he asked, he said, there's no way in the world France is going to win this war. All right. Ho Chi Minh has gotten the Viet Minh to a point that they would rather die than go back under the yoke of colonialism. France.
Can I jump in just for a sec, Jim? I don't want to interrupt, but I think Sean is wanting to know about Trump and the assassination attempt on Trump. And I mean, the way I view it is that Trump and Kennedy and maybe President Jimmy Carter, they were not part of the plan, I think, going forward. And they represented, especially President Kennedy and President Trump, they represent an aberration to the plot of like Jim has mentioned, maybe the power elite, and so I'm not surprised about what happened to either President Trump or President Kennedy. I think that that especially with regard to the way the Secret Service protection was not very effective in either Dallas or in Butler, Pennsylvania. There's certainly speculation in both of those events that that the Secret Service was not up to snuff on either of those events, and whether there was a background reason for that. Well, you know what, the report on Butler, it was released late on a Friday night, and it didn't get very much media coverage. I think I barely saw any media coverage on the investigative report on the Butler, Pennsylvania attempt on President Trump's life. I think that really should have got a lot more coverage in the mainstream media. And I mean, the report on President Kennedy's Secret Service coverage, no one lost their job, and you know what, life for everyone else went on after that, and it's pretty amazing. There are parallels definitely between.
Well, it
Butler
was
and
an
what happened.
improvement because the head of the Secret Service got fired, you know, in the Trump
That's-
incident. Yeah, nothing happened to anybody in the Secret Service in the Kennedy case.
Yeah, I'm sorry to jump in, Jim, but I think I think this is what Sean was really
Okay, fine.
inquiring about in terms of President Trump's the attempt on President Trump.
Right, we've got almost 2,000 watching live. There's 50 unanswered questions already pending. It's going to be one of those nights, folks. We've got Andrew and Jim, and you can see to the side of Andrew there, the book cover, The JFK Assassination Chokeholds. The link is in the description box, and there's also a X Twitter link for the guys as well, if you want to go and follow them over there, and perhaps when the majority of the questions are unanswered at the end of the night, you can take them over there. So, right. So the next question from J.R. Williams is, and you've had a lot of questions come in about Alan Dulles. Do you think Alan Dulles being on the Warren Commission was quite dubious?
It was worse than that. You know, that's putting it mildly. It was a disgrace that Alan Dulles was on the Warren Commission. I mean, the short answer, of course, is why would you place somebody that Kennedy fired on the investigating body to find out who killed him? You know, all right. See, Alan Dulles had been the director of the CIA for, I think, 7 or 8 years, up to the time that he sold Kennedy, you know, this bill of goods called the Bay of Pigs operation, all right, which ended up with an utter disaster. And Kennedy had listened to Dulles on this, and Dulles had given him some very, very bad information about, for example, that there was going to be an uprising on the island, which there was none. Okay, you know, and so he put his brother Robert in charge of an investigation into what really happened, and his brother Robert came to the conclusion that Alan Dulles knew that this was going to fail, and he was banking on Kennedy losing his nerve and sending in the Marines and the Navy to save the day, which Kennedy could not have done because a week before, he had said in public there will be no American intervention in Cuba. Okay? And so it's an interesting story how this happened. Robert Kennedy consulted one of his father's friends, Robert Lovett, who had been a former Secretary of Defense. And Lovett had told Bobby Kennedy, me and my buddy David Bruce, had tried to get Allen Dulles fired because we thought what he was doing was absolutely wrong with the CIA. All right. I mean, he was going around overthrowing, third world countries left and right, okay, et cetera, and leaving a bad taste in everybody's mouth. But we couldn't get him fired because his brother was a Secretary of the State, John Foster Dulles. So we couldn't get him fired. All right. And so Bobby says, I want you to say that to my brother in the Oval Office. Okay. And so he brings Levitt into the Oval Office, and Levitt tells him the whole story. And so Kennedy then fires not just Allen Dulles, but also Dick Bissell, the director of plans, and the deputy, Allen Dulles' deputy, Cabell. All right, Charles Cabell. He fired the whole top of the CIA. And so to put somebody like that, investigating Kennedy's death, I mean, please, and one last point about that. Dulles was the only guy on the Warren Commission who didn't have a job. He didn't have a job. What does that mean? Well, that means that he could spend more time than anybody else working on this Warren Commission, which, by the way, he did. He was the single most active member of the Warren Commission. He attended the most meetings and he asked the most questions. All right. So this was simply inexplicable as to how the guy got on a thing in the first place. Well, according to David Talbot, Dulles was the only guy who lobbied for the job. He actually wanted to be on the Warren Commission. Other people like Richard Russell did not want to do it. Okay. And Warren, he didn't want to do it either. Johnson had to intimidate both those guys by giving him this story about, look, if you guys don't serve, there's this information we have about Oswald in Mexico City visiting the Cuban embassy and giving the Russian embassy. Now, do you want this to turn into World War III? Okay. Do you want atomic bombs going off? Do you want 60 million people dead in 2 hours? And that's how we got him to go on. Well, Dulles actually volunteered. He wanted to be on the commission. Figure that one out. Yeah.
Sean, the way I see things is if you believe that the Kennedy assassination was a coup, a military coup, a security state coup against President Kennedy, the way I see the Warren Commission, it was formed in order to mediate a peaceful internal resolution of that coup. So you had members of the security state, McCloy and Dulles, and you had senators and Congress people, some of them maybe representing the FBI in there. And really, it was to keep a lid on things so there wasn't any kind of internal prolonged dispute. It's like, let's work things out in private at the Warren Commission, and we'll come up with some phony story to say some crazy kid in Dallas shot the president from behind when all the evidence suggested the opposite. It was mediating an internal dispute between agencies and the military, and they did it in private, and they figured things out, and President Johnson averted a powder keg. That's my own personal view.
So the other big name that's coming up over and over in the questions is the involvement of LBJ. What are you guys' thoughts?
Well, let's put it this way. I believe that Johnson was really cognizant of what happened. All right. Give you an example. He appointed Richard Russell, who had been his mentor in the Senate when he was a young man. Okay, and he owed a lot of his career to Richard Russell. Richard Russell wanted a dissenting opinion in the Warren Commission because he never believed a single bullet theory. All right. And he really wanted this in the commission. Well, the commission lied to him, and they made believe they were recording his dissenting opinion when they really weren't. But that night, before he went back to Georgia, he called up Johnson and he said, I have all kinds of problems with this report, you know, especially when they have this one bullet going through both Kennedy and Conley. He said, I just don't believe it. And Johnson said, I don't believe it either. So in other words, he knew, okay, that his own report was a bunch of malarkey. Okay, because I don't have to go into it because your listeners probably know this. The single bullet theory is the foundation of the Warren Commission. Without the single bullet theory, you have ipso facto a conspiracy. All right. And so that's why they had to have it. But both Russell and Johnson, didn't believe it. And so I agree with what Andrew just said. I believe that Johnson wanted to paper over, this East-West dispute, okay, because everybody believed, and this is another falsity, everybody at that time believed that Oswald was a communist, all right? And therefore, since he had been to the Russian, allegedly, I mean, we get into that, we'll be here another hour, okay? But he had allegedly been to the Russian and the Cuban embassies. And he had met at the Russian embassy with a guy named Kostakov, who was supposed to be in charge of liquidations for the Russians in the Western Hemisphere. All right. And so this is what compelled Johnson, to do what he did. And he knowingly covered this up. And by the way, let me add one more point about that. John Conley was Johnson's best buddy from Texas. He was the governor at that time. He was riding right in front of JFK, and he was hit, okay, during the fusillade. Doug Thompson, a reporter in 1982, met Conley at a Democratic fundraiser in, I believe, Arizona. It might have been New Mexico. And he said, well, this is a lifetime opportunity I have here. And so he goes up to Conley and he says, do you believe that Oswald was a lone assassin in Dallas? And Conley, without blinking an eye, he says, I have never believed for 5 seconds the Warren Commission conclusions. And Thompson is kind of stupefied. And he says,
Yeah.
What? He goes, well, then why didn't you say something? And this was the excuse he gave. And I'm sure this was the excuse that Johnson gave. Look, the country needed to be healed at that time. Okay? We didn't need to go into this whole search, for what really happened that would have torn everything apart. Okay? And so that's the excuse a lot of these people use, that it was for the good of the country. I don't think it was for the good of the country. I think it was for the good of some conspirators to get away with this huge, awful crime. And the country was ruined as a result of that. There would have been no Vietnam War, okay, if Kennedy had lived.
Yeah, Sean, I don't think that President Johnson was directly involved with the conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy, but I don't think it's deniable at this point that he definitely controlled the aftermath and the cover-up and the appointment of the Warren Commission and making sure that all the evidence went through the FBI. And it was a very controlled cover-up that Johnson was probably intimately involved with. A lot of the evidence, there's tapes of him talking to the senators and to J. Edgar Hoover, and it makes it quite clear he didn't believe any of the major pieces, and his attorney general essentially said, look, we gotta find a way to place it all on this kid Oswald and just wrap it up, guys. And the last chapter of our book, it really does go into detail. It's called 60 Years of Obstruction of Justice. And right from Dealey Plaza, where the assassination took place, with phony Secret Service officers right on the ground, telling people to go away from the grassy knoll, right to the way the Warren Commission moved bullet wound diagrams, to the way the CIA infiltrated the House Select Committee on Assassinations, lied to the House Select Committee, lied to the Assassination Records Review Board. It's the longest chapter of the book, and it's kind of a unique chapter that it really puts together in one place, just a litany of obstruction of justice, a litany of obfuscation, a litany of lies about what actually happened during the assassination. And Sean, it goes right up to today with the postponement of the release of these records. And I know you want to get to more questions from your listeners, and they're great questions. Tracy's question a couple of questions ago, what, two of the chapters of our book are probably, if I can say, I didn't write them, so I'm allowed to, really pump them as great parts of the book and of the historical record. But on the head wound, the magic bullet, and the autopsy, I think those three chapters together would give Tracy like an answer about the wound to the back of the president's head and how that happened. But Sean, Jim has mentioned this at the beginning of the show, and I don't know whether you want to get into it or not, but myself and two other researchers went to National Archives. And Jim, I don't know whether this is a good time to talk about this, because it ties right in with the records and the orders from President Trump to postpone to release, but really to right now continue the postponement of the release of these records. But in the mid-1990s, this Assassination Records Review Board, it had a task. We're going to collect all of the government records on the assassination from the CIA, from the FBI, from the Secret Service, even from the U.S. Postal Service, okay? It had sweeping powers of subpoena, and its job was to gather and collect all of this records and evidence from all the government agencies. It was going to review all of the evidence, and then it was going to release it all to the public. And it had that mandate: collect, review, and release. And the statute provided an absolute drop-dead date of October 26, 2017, to release all the records. Now, one of the things that the Assassination Records Review Board had to do under the law, and this is crazy when you think about it, they had to provide a final agency order for each of the millions of pages of records, right? There were tens of thousands of records, and for each record, the law stated that the ARRB had to create what's called an Assassination Records Review Board final determination notification. And what that document, it's a precise document. They created tens of thousands of these final determination notifications for each record. And in those records, what they had to do was put the precise reason for each redaction in that record. So the Act gives very specific criteria on which the government can seek to withhold that information from the public. That's Section 6 of the Act. So in each of these documents, the ARB put the reasons for each redaction, and this is what's most important. They also, by law, had to put a date on which the National Archivist had to review those redactions or release them. And you know what? The ARRB did this gigantic job over 4 years. They created tens of thousands of these final determinations. These are essentially little mini court orders for each record. And again, the law said that the archivist had to comply with these orders. And when I went into the National Archives with one of my co-authors, Paul Blow, and another great researcher from down in Florida, Jeff Crudell, we went in with one specific reason, and it was to obtain copies of all of these ARRB final orders with regard to the records. I put in advance requests for this information, and I was going there hoping to get my hands on tens of thousands of these records. They wheel out a little cart, and it's full of these gray boxes, and there were about 15 or 16 of these gray boxes, and only 1.5 of them contained these ARRB final determinations. So thankfully I had a really nice scanner. I scanned about 450 of these. And Sean, when we analyzed them, what it found is that the ARRB literally ordered hundreds of the sample that we took. So we only got 450 out of tens of thousands. The ARRB ordered in writing that these records be released in January of 2006. Okay. Now, here's the kicker. You can't search for these final determination forms. Most of them are not digitized. They're not cataloged. They're not indexed. You simply can't find these ARRB final determination forms. They're actually boxed and cataloged under this label that no one can understand called press and public contacts. So they're virtually unsearchable. And what's happened is we've seen that even though the ARB ordered these records released in 2006, many of them stayed withheld and kept in the secret collection for another 15 years until 2021 to 2023. And Sean, we've even found records that were ordered released in 2006 that are still being, at least postponements or redactions are still being withheld to this very day under what are called CIA transparency plans. So these are final agency orders ordering these documents to be released in 2006. And the orders themselves seem to have been buried or put under strange cataloging so they couldn't be found. And they most certainly, a lot of them were not acted upon as was required by the act. This is actually breaking news on your show. This was just recently discovered and recently analyzed by myself and 2 other researchers.
So in other words, Trump really didn't even have to issue this order, okay? Because it was a final determination by the agency itself. He could have unilaterally just gone ahead and released all the documents. I'm not sure if he's aware of this, okay? You know, and hopefully, at least what I try and plan on doing is if Bobby Kennedy gets approved, okay, as HHS administrator, then I will try and consult with him once that's over, because that was a rather loud and boisterous arrangement. Okay. Once that's over, then I will try and get this information to him. Okay. Because I think it's very important that Trump doesn't have to go through all this stuff. He can just do it, unilaterally.
Yeah. To follow up on what Jim said, Sean, that the fact is, I mean, I've been covering this and researching this for since 2017. And the information that I've seen coming out of archives and the Office of Legal Counsel, in particular, the Office of Legal Counsel advised President Trump back in 2017 when that deadline was approaching. And I don't think either President Trump or President Biden were made aware that an independent agency already issued detailed orders to release many of these records. I don't think they were ever told that. And if they knew that, why would they want to wade into this hornet's nest? And if there's been a suppression of these final agency orders, I think Congress and President Trump ought to insist that the archivists digitize all these records. They're already digitized, let's be honest. And they ought to publicly release them so that the public can see that the ARRB did their job, issued orders for each of these records, and these orders weren't complied with.
All right, guys, if you are watching, I am with 2 of the authors of the JFK assassination chokeholds. I'm putting the link in the live chat, and the link is in the description box if you're watching this on replay. We've got a question from our dear friend of the channel, Professor Hamamoto. Was Otto Skorzeny in on the plot to kill JFK, as argued in the book, The Skorzeny Papers, or is this disinformation?
All right. If you don't know, Otto Skorzeny was Hitler's #1 commando during World War II. And Hitler gave him the assignment of, of getting Mussolini out. Okay. Which he actually did. All right. And his name, he was Scarface because during one of his missions, he got caught. He did work for the CIA. He was like a have gun for hire, okay, in the post World War II world. And if you wanted to hire him to do a certain thing, he would do it if you put enough money on the table. All right. He did work for the CIA in that example I used earlier in Congo. There were reliable reports that he was trying, to restore Katanga as an independent state as opposed to being part of Congo. All right. Now, this other question about whether or not he was in on the Kennedy assassination. It's that book, okay, is not, to me, it wasn't really convincing one way or the other. I don't want to go as far as saying that it's disinformation because that implies that somebody put something up to someone, and so I don't want to go that far. I'm just saying that the case really has not been made strongly as him being a part of it. And since we're on the subject, most people today believe that the plot to kill Kennedy was a triangle, okay, where you had the CIA, you had the Cuban exiles, and you brought in the mafia at the end because the plan to kill Oswald at the Texas Theater didn't work out. There were too many people there, and Oswald was making too much of a scene. Okay, and so they called in probably somebody like Trafficante, and then he got in contact with McWillie, and McWillie gave Ruby the assignment to go in and polish off Oswald. And so that's why people would call it a triangle. That's what probably, now I'm not saying that is 100% what happened, okay, but I'm saying most informed opinion agrees on it. That's what happened to JFK.
Andrew, anything to add?
No, I pretty much agree with Jim on that. I haven't read too much about Otto Skorzeny's involvement with the JFK assassination. He was certainly a hot item after World War II. I mean, he freed Mussolini from the Allies, and he had quite a storied career working for the Nazis before he became an asset for hire, I guess, for entities like the CIA. But I don't see too much that suggests that he was part of the Kennedy assassination. But I won't write it off. I mean, anything is possible till we have all the evidence.
Yeah, the extraction of Mussolini is one of the most breathtaking stories you could ever encounter. So here's definitely one that's up your street, Jim, and it's from John. How factual is Oliver Stone's JFK movie?
Okay. Oliver got hammered when this movie came out. Okay. There was a lot of, rage and fury. How could you possibly dare to counter the Warren Commission? Well, there was very little analysis. And so in one of the books I wrote, all right, the JFK assassination, the evidence today, I decided to go ahead and analyze it. scene by scene. And I did about the first third of the director's cut of the movie, which is about an hour. All right. And I went through it and I described the scene and I said, now this is the evidence. And you want to know something that ended up being surprising even to me? With the declassified files, which Oliver did not have, okay, that movie holds up pretty well. Now, there are some things in it that if I had been advising Oliver, I wouldn't have put in. Okay. Like for example, the scene that everybody talks about with Mr. X, okay, in Washington, where they walk from what is the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument, and Mr. X gives him it's a breathtaking scene because for the first time in the history of cinema, people were allowed to see the crimes of the CIA and what the CIA had done in the name of democracy. So it's beautiful filmmaking, you know, the editing and the photography, etc. You know, but that didn't happen until after. Jim Garrison did not meet Fletcher Prouty until after. If I would have been advising Oliver at that time, which I was not, I would have told him, why don't you use Richard Case Nagel? He really was there. And he really talked to Garrison about the CIA and Cuba and all this other stuff. Use him. And then for the Vietnam stuff, and again, nobody knew this, there was a professor at Ohio University who wrote Jim Garrison a 26-page, double-sided, handwritten essay entitled The Death of Kennedy and the Escalation of the Vietnam War. This is 1967. And he's writing a 26-page handwritten essay. And I would have said to Oliver, okay, see now, have Garrison pick up his mail when he gets back to talking to Nagel. He opens up this folder and he starts reading this by desk light, lighting up a pipe. And then you can tell the whole Vietnam story through this guy. So, although not technically true, they are, if you use a little bit of figurative language, you know, those things did happen. Okay. So if I had to score the movie on, you know, a Hollywood scale, okay, I would probably give it maybe a B+, you know, as far as being true to what actually happened, you know. And by the way, let me say as a final point, you know, this scene that everybody got put out at the end with the doctor on the stand saying that we couldn't dissect the wound because we were told not to by the Pentagon. And the guy goes, who's in charge here? And this general goes, I am. That all happened. That's all in the trial of Clay Shaw after the testimony of Pierre Fink, who was there. So all these people getting bent out of shape about, I mean, it shows you how ignorant they are, you know?
You know, can I jump in here too? I think here's the reality. There are a lot of Oliver Stone haters in the mainstream media and in the intelligence agencies. And they've done their absolute best to destroy Oliver Stone and JFK as film. But the reality is it won 2 Academy Awards. It sparked an entire new generation of researchers who have done some fantastic work on the shoulders of the original researchers. Most importantly, it was the catalyst for a massive public outrage and reaction to the fact that the government was hiding records from its own people. And it was the catalyst for the creation of the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act in 1992. That was passed unanimously by every single Democrat senator and Republican senator and Democratic congressman and Republican congressman and Joe Biden at the time. You know what? Almost nothing passes unanimously in the US government except for the JFK Records Act. That's what Oliver Stone's film JFK did. And you know what? It showed the Zapruder film, which, again, another thing that we can credit Jim Garrison for. The Zapruder film was obtained, I think, Jim, right, in as a result
It
of
was
that.
shown at the trial of Clay Shaw.
Yeah, it was first shown kind of publicly at the trial of Clay Shaw, and word started to get out what was actually in the Zapruder film. And it wasn't until 1975 that the public first saw the Zapruder film. Again, that was suppressed by Time Life magazine from 1963 until 1975, until it was shown on the Geraldo show. This is what, and there was a massive reaction in 75 when the public first saw the Zapruder film. That's what created the House Select Committee on Assassinations. So they can try to discredit Oliver Stone and the film JFK. Stone has acknowledged that he's taken some artistic license in this, but I think the end result has been extremely positive to get the truth out.
Right. A few people have asked about Marilyn Monroe, and a question from Jay. Would Marilyn Monroe still be, would she have been alive if she hadn't got involved with the Kennedys?
Okay, well, this is one of these mythologies that have been out there, for a long time. It goes back to the early '60s, and then through a lot of different authors like Tony Summers and etc. All right, there have been about 3 or 4 books of recent vintage, by a guy named Don McGovern, who have finally put this mythology to rest. Okay. First of all, there was nothing between Bobby Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe. And Bobby Kennedy was not in Brentwood on the day that Marilyn Monroe passed away. Okay. All right. There might have been one incident between JFK and Marilyn Monroe. Okay. And that's it. All right. There was never any of this romance or long sexual affair, etc. People like David Heyman, who was a pathological liar, wrote about this stuff in his books. Now, why can I say with certainty that Bobby Kennedy was not in Brentwood on the day she passed away? Because there was a book by a woman who I think died a couple of years ago, Sue Bernard. All right. And in that book, she has pictures that were taken that day of Bobby Kennedy up in the San Francisco area, about 350 miles away. And they cover literally every activity they did from morning to dusk. And in addition to that, there were several witnesses who talked about taking the pictures. Now, any lawyer, which Andrew is, okay, will tell you that if you have a photograph or an illustration and you have the people who took the photograph or the illustration, that is courtroom evidence, okay, that overrules any kind of hearsay, or eyewitness testimony. All right. It's allegedly eyewitness testimony. All right. So I can say for a fact that Bobby Kennedy was not there that day. All right. This is, and I have to say, there's a lot of things that happened after Kennedy was murdered that were meant to distract from who he was and what he was trying to do. And this is one of them. Okay. So I'm kind of glad that question, got asked.
Andrew, anything to add?
No, it's not an area that I've taken a particular interest in studying. I mean, everyone's interested in Marilyn and the Kennedys, but from a research standpoint, I just don't see very much there.
A lot of people are asking how redacted you expect the documents to be, and Bailey's asking whether you think the documents will name the shooter.
Do you want me to take that, Jim?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah. So when I was at Archives, we had a chance to really dive into some of the records that are still being withheld. I have to admit there are most of the records that are being withheld aren't withheld in full. So there's a few words redacted or blacked out, or a sentence blacked out. They're mostly names or exposing the identity of a source or an agent, and so I wouldn't be surprised. That's the state of the records right now. Most of them are small redactions. There are a small number of records that are withheld in full. Some of them are withheld in full under a special section of the Act that covers what are called deeds of gifts. And they include what a lot of people are hoping to eventually see, are an interview transcript between a journalist named William Manchester and Jacqueline Kennedy. That's probably one of the main ones that people want to see, because Jacqueline Kennedy apparently provided pretty intimate and detailed statements about what transpired in the presidential limousine in Dealey Plaza and on the way to Parkland Hospital. And they're under the control of Carolyn Kennedy right now, and unless she says that they should be released, they could be held, I think, until 2079. So I mean, that's the main thing that I think a lot of people want to get their hands on. There are also some CIA documents that are withheld in full, but a large majority of the records are just redactions, small redactions of small parts.
One of the things I think a lot of people want to see is the so-called Schlesinger memo. All right. What is the Schlesinger memo? JFK was so upset after what the CIA had done to him at the Bay of Pigs that at one point he was actually thinking of reorganizing the whole agency. Okay. And so he had put his aide, Arthur Schlesinger, who had served in intelligence in World War II, to put a plan together, okay, to reorganize the CIA. And in fact, Schlesinger didn't even want to name it the CIA anymore. Okay. All right. And so he actually did get to work on this thing. And some of that has been declassified, but some of it has not yet been declassified. So I think that would be a very interesting document, I mean, to say the least. As far as the question about who the shooter was, I think her name is Bailey. I don't think that's going to be in the documents. And I don't think, I hate to say this, but I don't think we're ever going to know. And it's not because we're not trying. It's just because, when the Warren Commission screwed the evidence up so badly, people didn't even start looking for who the real assassin could have been until Jim Garrison, in 19, and that was like 3 or 4 years later. So it's very, very hard, to crack a cold case like that, especially when you have a complex conspiracy. All right. This was not a garden variety bank robbery. Okay. This was most people believe was a complex, intricate conspiracy. So that's why we're probably never going to know.
And the best way that I think is being described to really look at what's in these records, we're not going to get the smoking gun document that laid out the whole plot. We're not going to get the names of the shooters, but each piece of information that's in each of these records is like, I don't know who, maybe it's Jeff Morley who described it like this first, one of the great researchers in the research community. He described each piece of information like a little spot in a mosaic. And the more pieces that you get to put the picture together of a mosaic, the picture becomes clearer and clearer. And I don't think, like Jim, I don't think we're ever going to find out who pulled the trigger. But with the information that has come out over the last 60 years, drip by drip, piece by piece, the picture is really, really getting undeniably clear at this point that it was not Lee Harvey Oswald. It was not Lee Harvey Oswald alone, and that there was absolutely a greater plot. The CIA has not disclosed what they knew at the time from 1958 until 1963. They fought tooth and nail to not provide any information to the investigative entities that have looked at this through the 60s, 70s, and 90s. They have done everything that they can to make it as difficult as possible for the truth to come out. But over the years, especially after the Assassination Records Review Board, big pieces have dropped that completely discredit the 1964 Warren Commission findings.
Question from Agnes. Jim and Andrew, thanks for your work and exclusive. Can't wait to read your book. Among conspiracies, thoughts about Jackie and JFK marriage was arranged, or the squib theory per JFK, solving crime of the century. So a lot of people have been mentioning squib theory in the live chat.
I reviewed that movie. Okay. And let's put it this way. I put it negatively. It's not a very good film, and it doesn't hold up to analysis. Okay, you can find it on kennedysandking.com. You'll find a review. Oh, and I also think I did it on my Substack. I also have a Substack that goes under my name. Okay, so please don't put very much credibility in that. Now, as far as JFK really liked Jackie Kennedy. Okay. And in fact, the very first time he ever met her on a train, okay, she really didn't think very much of him because she didn't know who he was. Okay. But he was really kind of like trying to talk to her, trying to be charming, etc. Okay. And she kind of just blew him off. All right. But then he was very interested in her. All right. And the more she got to know him, come on, he's a pretty attractive character, isn't he? I mean, he's this young, handsome guy, who has all this money, etc., all this charm, all this wit. Okay, and so she eventually did return his feelings. Okay, now I think what they're talking about, the arrangement, is that they did have problems later. Okay, in their marriage, in which Jackie was kind of upset about, all right, and complained about to Joseph Kennedy, all right, okay. But make no mistake, Jackie Kennedy did very well, by having JFK. I mean, she got like a $2 million after he passed away. She got like a $2 million equivalent today, $2 million a year. She borrowed money from Bobby Kennedy to buy a beautiful home in suburban Washington, which she never paid Bobby back for. And then she leveraged that into a 14-room townhouse across the street from Central Park in New York City. That townhouse sold in 2009 for $36 million. When Jackie Kennedy met JFK, she was making $600 a week at a Washington newspaper. So she did pretty well for herself.
Sounds like she was a savvy real estate investor. Anything to add, Andrew, there?
No, I you know what? I haven't read anything about the squib theory, but it sounds interesting.
A lot of people in the chat asking about the UFO files connected to JFK's death.
My view on that is one set of conspiracy theories is enough for me. I try not to dabble in too many conspiracy theories. There may be UFOs. I don't know. I don't spend too much time on that. But again, it's interesting.
We had a writer at kennedysandking.com, a guy named Seamus Coogan, who did a lot of research on this. Okay. And even if you go to the UFO community, I think it's called the Majestic Papers. Okay. These ended up being proven as being fraudulent. Okay. All right. So no, it's not true that JFK died because he was on the brink of meeting some Martian. Okay. Or some UFO landing in Nebraska or whatever. Okay. No, it's not true. Oh, now we got another one. Was Dorothy Kilgallen murdered over JFK? All right. This is a very interesting question. All right. Dorothy Kilgallen was one of the very few practicing journalists who was very interested in the John F. Kennedy case. And she actually wrote several columns about the JFK case. And she went down to the Jack Ruby trial in Dallas. And according to people around her, she had visited New Orleans once or twice, okay, prior to her, let's call it a mysterious death, okay, and there were certain objects and papers that were missing from her house, okay, after her death, which many people think pertained to the JFK case. Now, the mystery about her death is that she was found in a room. Her body was found in a room that she never slept in. Okay. And she was also reading a book that she had already read. Okay. So these are some, and there was definitely, I don't think anybody argues about this. There was some kind of cover up in the chemical analysis of her autopsy. All right. Most people believe that if she was murdered, and I can say this because he's passed away, that her boyfriend, Ron Pataki, was likely in on it because he was reliably seen in New York, okay, on the night that she passed away. Now, again, I'm not saying this happened because, again, this is a cold case. But, and by the way, the DA in New York will not reopen it. Okay,
Didn't that just happen last year, Jim?
Yeah, they tried to reopen it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it got rejected or dismissed by the DA. Yeah, it would have been interesting to see what they could have determined with modern forensics.
So I've often pondered the next question. Why did Lee Harvey Oswald kill Officer Tippet?
Oswald didn't kill Tippet. Okay, the case against Oswald in the Tippet case is about as weak as it is in the JFK case. All right. Let's just use one example. Oswald's last seen outside of his rooming house, waiting at a bus stop at 1:04. All right. Now, the best time estimates for the death of Tippet are 1:08 to 1:09. All right. Now, it was 9/10 of a mile from the rooming house to 10th and Peyton, which is where he was killed. Just remember, Roger Bannister was the first guy to run a 4-minute mile in 1957. So how on earth could Lee Harvey Oswald negotiate that distance in his street clothes, and nobody saw him, breaking the sound barrier or anything like that. Okay. All right. Okay. Then on top of that, you have the problem with the ballistics in this case. All right. The shells, okay, the shells do not match the bullets. Okay, I think there's three of one and two different brands. I think Remington and another one. And the shells, those are the projectiles. The shells, there's 2 and 2 of Remington and the other brand. So they don't match each other. All right. Okay. Then there's the problem of, why didn't the Dallas police send the projectiles to the FBI until 8 days after the murder? Nobody's ever been able to answer that question. Back in those days, you sent it to the FBI overnight to get the analysis on the bullet. Okay. They didn't do that. And then somebody found the file, the report, when the Warren Commission asked for it. Okay. And they themselves were shocked. Why did you wait so long to get an analysis? And some people believe that the reason they waited for so long is because they wanted to fix the evidence so they would get a positive feedback. But even at that, they had problems matching up the bullets with the shells. So they decided to base the case on the shells alone. All right. All right. Now, another problem with this is that the only person who the Warren Commission brought out who said that they saw Oswald murder Tippet was a woman named Helen Markham. To go through all the problems with Helen Markham's testimony, I mean, this has become legendary. Okay. She got so unstable, okay, after the shooting, that they had to give her smelling salts at the lineup. Okay. Then they asked her to pick out the right guy, and she picked out the wrong guy. Now, this was almost impossible. Why? Because all the people in the lineup were younger than Oswald, were dressed well. Oswald had a T-shirt on with a black eye. Okay. How could, and he was screaming bloody murder that he shouldn't be in this lineup. I mean, so how could you have missed it? Okay. But this is the case of against Oswald for Tippet. It's almost as ridiculous as the Kennedy case. So
Yeah,
I don't think Oswald shot Tippet.
It's pretty incredible. I mean, there are a lot of researchers who've done time distance studies, and I mean, I've been down to Dallas and checked out Dealey Plaza, and the last time I was down, two great researchers, Matt Dowdett and Rick DeLauder, they actually did a on the ground time distance recreation for a whole bunch of researchers. And you know what? It's just fantastic what the official story is trying to tell you Oswald did in the immediate aftermath of leaving the Texas School Book Depository. Those guys did just an amazing job, and I think I'm not the only one who's checked this out. There was a fairly large group of people who went and saw this, and I mean, even some official investigations have made it very difficult to reconcile how Oswald ended up at 10th and Patton, where the Tippet murder took place.
So Susan's wondering then if you guys have any thoughts on who killed Tippet and what would a motive be?
All right, let's get to the second question first. The motive would be to inflame the police and insinuate that whoever killed Tippet had to have killed Kennedy. Okay. And so that would inflame the police to do so. Okay. And to do what they did to Oswald, which was pretty brutal, what the Dallas police did to Oswald. All right. Now, as far as who killed Tippet, again, this is one of these questions that you're never going to actually find a definitive answer. You know, there's some people who believe that it might have been part of the Dallas police. Okay. You know, there's some people who believe that there was a guy from Philadelphia named Vaganoff who just happened to be in Dallas that day. Okay. And happened to be in the vicinity of where the Tippet shooting was. There was a very, very interesting article about Vaganoff in a magazine, I think it was Esquire, back in 1967, okay, about his sort of weird activities, you know, that day. So there's a book which I have over here. It's called Into the Nightmare by Joseph McBride. And it's probably the best book length study of the Tippet case. And he puts together about 5 suspects at the end, and one of them was Vaganoff.
Danny's wondering, did Dallas PD conduct their own homicide investigation?
What investigation? The Dallas police, once they had Oswald, okay, that was basically it. I mean, the one test they did do came back negative. Okay, which was the what's that test called, Andrew? The nitrates?
Yeah, it's a paraffin test.
The paraffin test. Yeah, the paraffin test came back negative for Oswald's cheek. Okay, and how the heck can you fire a rifle like this without getting nitrates on your cheek? You know, because the blowback comes this way, you know, and so, you know.
Yeah, especially an old 1930s Italian carbine.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of residue that ends up blowing out of the breech on those weapons, and to have no nitrate against your firing side cheek, that test was a pretty reliable test at the time to see if
and
you
also
fired a gun.
When they sent the rifle to the FBI, okay, the best fingerprint guy in the country, Sebastian Latona, all right, he could not find any prints of value on that rifle. And so once he couldn't find any prints of value on the rifle, you know what he did? He broke down the rifle into its individual parts. Okay. Then he brought in a photographer, and the photographer brought in his lights. Okay. And they started taking pictures, you know, of highlighting every single area. And when the night was over, he said, "No, I can't find any prints of value on this rifle." Okay. Now, that's not the end of the story, though, because I'm sure most of you people were onto this by now. Once it went back to Dallas, they found fingerprints.
No, Jim. So just let me get this straight, okay? So they shipped the rifle to FBI headquarters, couldn't find any fingerprints, so they shipped it back to Dallas again. For what reason did they ship it back to Dallas?
All right. And by the way, let me say this. Do you know how good Sebastian Latona was at what he did? A homicide DA in Manhattan named Bob Tannenbaum told me, "Jim, every DA in the country wanted Sebastian Latona to testify at their murder trial. You know why? Because he wrote the pamphlet that every single police officer used in the fingerprint department to do the fingerprint work. So you felt like you were lucky if you got this guy to testify on your behalf." All right. That's what I mean about this case against Oswald.
So next question is, was the Babushka Lady a CIA asset?
Well, you got some sophisticated listeners here, don't you? I mean, I bet you most of the people don't even know who the Babushka Lady was. Okay, the Babushka Lady was this woman on the inside of Dealey Plaza. You know, not on the grassy knoll side across Elm, but on the infield. Okay, and most people believe she had this funny coat on. That's why she's called the Babushka Lady. All right. Most people believe she has a camera in her hands. You know, there's a debate as to what kind of camera it is, whether it is, you know, like a regular Polaroid, you know, still camera, or whether it was some kind of a film camera. All right. Nobody really knows that for a fact. Now, the important thing as far as evidence goes is that nobody ever found her film. Okay, that's and believe me, the FBI and the police were tracking down people with cameras that day, okay, and bringing them into the station and taking them in as evidence. All right. So that is the mystery about this woman. First of all, what was she doing there? Okay. And where did her film go? I cannot say, of course, whether or not she was a CIA asset, because everything about her was so mysterious. Nobody really knows very much about her for sure.
Well, there's a follow-up question. The credibility of Beverly Oliver coming forward as Babushka Lady, Scarf Lady, claims on having exclusive footage of assassination.
I don't have any comment on that.
Okay.
Yeah, neither do I.
You know, one way or the other, whether it's definitive or not.
All right. So Chris is wondering about your thoughts on the Umbrella Man.
Oh boy. Okay. The Umbrella Man is a guy in Dealey Plaza. He's on the grassy knoll side. All right. And very, very, very weird reaction. As the motorcade comes around Houston Street and is about to turn onto Elm, this guy does something very, very weird. He picks up his umbrella and he opens the umbrella. It wasn't raining. Okay. And so now what makes this even more interesting is that there's what looks to be a Latino or Cuban guy next to him. And nobody had that reaction. Nobody had that. He did. And then what makes this even more bizarre is that after the shooting, when, you know, everybody's running around Dealey Plaza, you know, they're running this way, they're running this way, they're running to the grass, you know, they're running in every, you know, like a bunch of crazy people after a shooting. That's the way you would react. Well, these two guys sit on the curb. They just sit there on the curb. Okay. And then after a couple of minutes, one gets up and goes one way, and one gets up and goes the other way. Except when you look at the dark complected guy, it looks, and I'm not saying it's true, okay, it looks like he has some kind of radio transmitter in his back pocket. So this has led some people to think maybe, just maybe, this was some kind of signal, you know, and the other guy was there to transmit the signal. Now, again, I'm not saying that that is what happened, okay, but I'm saying that it's very, very weird, okay, that the guy would be pumping an umbrella and I won't even get to his excuse for that. I mean, that's one of the silliest things I've ever heard in my life. What he
Well,
said
and he
later.
waited until the 1970s to come out of the weeds to declare who he was. I'm sorry, Jim, you just make me laugh. You sound like Joe Pesci's mother from Goodfellas. You know, one dog's looking this way, the other dog's looking that way. Hey, what do you want from me? You know, sorry, I thought that was great. But I mean, I don't even think that, you know, the whole Louis Stephen Witt from the House Select Committee on assassinations is worth getting into. I don't.
No,
I
it's
mean, I
not.
put him in the same category as some of the other attention seekers or distractions.
Guys, this 2 hours has gone hella fast, and that's a credit to your expertise and how fascinating this has been. You've still got almost 100 unanswered questions, so maybe we can get you guys to come back. I think there's
Sean,
be
are we going to be here till midnight?
It is midnight.
Are you going to send me? Are you going to send me food? Are you going to get an Uber truck outside?
So if we could get you guys' concluding remarks, and I'll put the link for the book in the live chat, and the book is also in the description box if you're watching it on replay. So let's get your concluding remarks, please.
Well, first, thanks so much for having us on, Sean. I very much appreciate the time, you know, and the opportunity to answer. You know, it's always nice to have an informed audience. Okay, so you don't have to start at square one. So it's nice having people with intelligent questions asking you out of real curiosity, and I think it shows. See, even though you're over there in the UK, I think this shows the incredible, almost, you know, subconscious grip that this case has, you know, on the American and the British psyche. You know, it's really the case that won't go away. You know, no matter how, you know, they try and dispel it, no matter how many excuses they make, it simply will not go away, because people understand that something happened to the United States after Kennedy was killed, and a period of, as they say, skepticism and cynicism replaced one of ebullience and optimism. You know, whether that was part of the plan, I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But that is what happened. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Andrew?
Sean, this has been amazing. I'm a fan of your work, so getting to meet you has been a real privilege. And thank you for having Jim and I on. You know, we cover a lot of ground on our Twitter feed at JFK Chokeholds. We have a website, and I appreciate you putting all of our links up. But there will be some breaking news about those ARRB final determinations. That it's going to be hitting the news. There's still a few days left before President Trump, the next shoe drops with President Trump's executive order. We're following all of that on our Twitter at JFK Chokeholds, and stay tuned. There's a lot to still happen in this.
Yeah, we'd love to get you guys back when some more news drops. So huge thank you for coming on. All of the links for the guests are in the description box, the X link and the book link. And I'm going to close the show and let you guys go. So cheers, fellas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Bye. Wow, phenomenal guests. I mean, 2 hours went in the blink of an eye. So please support the guests and check out the book. I'm sure many of your questions are answered in the book. And go over and give the guys some love on X. That will incentivize them to come back to the channel and answer even more questions, of which there are many. Questions were just growing in front of my eyes, but I couldn't keep up. So tomorrow, then, we have got an ex-homicide detective out of Indianapolis, I believe, Sergeant Christine Manina, who's investigated over 700 major crimes ranging from robberies to missing persons and grisly unalivings. She was in the Homicide Investigations Division of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department with 95% solve rate. She also became Detective of the Year. So that's coming at 6 p.m. tomorrow UK time. And possibly after that, back to back, we may have a January 6th defendant. Those guys got freed by Trump, who was working for the FBI, still became a defendant. We may have that, not yet fully confirmed. We're working on it. And then possibly after that, we may have ex-London detective, whistleblower John coming on and talking about the things he learned when John Wedger, the things he learned when he was a cop, exposing the predators. He worked Vice, etc. And he may be coming on with Ron. So we'll get all those firmed up tomorrow and we'll let you know. But there is going to be several of hours content coming tomorrow. And huge thank you for all the questions, guys. It's thanks to your questions that you help shape the atmosphere of the evening. And I've had such a great time. Like I said, 2 hours just went so fast. But we'll see some of you, all y'all, in tomorrow's streams. Thanks for tuning in. It's gone past midnight here now. I'm going to go to bed.